Welcome to the Decent Crypto Podcast. Today is part 3 of Bitcoin Month. We are live from New York City. Matt, what are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about TARO, Taproot Asset Representation Overlay.
Baby. We're getting into the meat of it already.
This one's actually really cool because I knew almost nothing about this, and then one of our listeners hit me up on Telegram like, hey man, some of the stuff you guys talked about last time, like Taro is the solution for this. And so it's like really cool to have that like audience feedback. Keep tweeting at us, keep hitting us up on Telegram. We are here with the special requested Taro episode. So, Karan, why does Bitcoin only have Bitcoin?
Why does Bitcoin only have Bitcoin?
Yeah, like on Ethereum, you have all sorts of good stuff, right? You have Shiba Inu, you have Pudgy Penguins, you have USDC. What's good? Like Bitcoin is just Bitcoin. What's going on there?
That's a great question. Good place to start. So the reason for that is that Ethereum has a open smart contracting language, right? Or smart contract language. So you can basically program anything, any kind of contract, open-ended kind of contract onto the Ethereum blockchain, right? So the programming language for Ethereum is Turing complete. So you can basically create new tokens as a part of the contracts that you write. Bitcoin doesn't allow for that. It doesn't allow for this open-ended kind of scripting. You have to stay within certain confines of what the protocol allows. It's very much constrained. And the native token for everything that happens on Bitcoin is Bitcoin itself, is the native token, right? So that's the kind of simple answer.
Yeah, it's this lack of like Turing completeness, right? Where with a Turing complete like state machine, you can represent arbitrary logic however much you want, right? With Bitcoin, it's limited to its own set of opcodes. Bitcoin does have the ability to script, and we'll get a little bit into that later, but it's just a much harder system to introduce flexibility to. But that doesn't mean people haven't tried, right? Like what's good with these colored coins? I've heard a little bit about it.
Yeah, so colored coins are really, in a way, they're kind of the first attempts at NFTs, right? They are a way of storing more than just transaction data within a transaction. So I forget technically how they work, right? What was it? So like along with each transaction, you send another set of data, or that has basically a representation of like a color, right? And only specific
like red,
wallets
green,
that
blue.
have, like literally just the colors on the color wheel.
Like red coin.
Wait, what?
Like red coin, blue coin, green coin.
Oh yeah. I mean, like basically these colored coins are only like if these wallets interact with these specific coins, right? Like I don't know how like the technical kind of breakdown of this is actually.
I mean, there have been a few different approaches technically to how exactly color coins work. One of them that I read the most about uses something called an op return code. So this is pretty interesting. So op return is like a field you can add to a Bitcoin transaction. And for a little while, wallets were actually letting you use this as a sort of like comment section on your Bitcoin transaction. Op return, I want to say, is like the code that's used for like canceling or like voiding a transaction within like the Bitcoin like scripting language. So it's op_return. And so it just like returns. It just stops like processing, right? So if you have say you have like a relatively like there's simple Bitcoin transactions, right? I send you Bitcoin, right? But there are more complex transactions that might create multiple outputs. So I send you a little Bitcoin, and then I also send to another output, say 0 Bitcoin or 1 Satoshi or something. Right. And then and that one can have like an associated script with it. So for example, like a multi-sig, right, is like at its core kind of like a script, right, that says, hey, if you have 3 of these 5 signatures, then send the Bitcoin. It's a
Mm,
kind of script. You can have
mm,
sort of like more complex scripting as well. But op return is like an instruction you would put in your script to say, you know what, fuck it, just like stop, like don't succeed,
mm.
right? And Op return codes are kind of interesting, right? Because when you have like a UTXO, like when you have an output that uses op return, um, it can kind of be disregarded from the chain, right? Like that can get pruned because it's not spendable, right? It'll never succeed. It's just a complete. It's like a useless piece of data that's sitting on the blockchain, right?
Okay. But it
Um,
does get processed, right? So if it gets relayed to the miner or whatever, they do process it or they add it to the block. Like what happens exactly to that piece of data?
it'll get added to the block, but it can get what's called pruned, right? Along with like if I sent another transaction that sent like 0 Bitcoin, that could
Mm-hmm.
get pruned as well, right? And so when I say pruned, I mean by like, depending on what kind of archival node you're running, like a full node may not keep a copy of the op return transactions.
Mm.
Um, so, for a while, people were using it as a way to store data on chain. Um, but interestingly, this was kind of contentious. So op return, because these transactions are just like not usable, right? And it clearly is just only for the storage of data on chain. A lot of people saw it as bloating the Bitcoin blockchain, as like a way that, as like a low cost like data storage solution. And in the limit case, there's like infinite demand for data storage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people were like, yo, like we didn't come together to build like an irrevocable database of data. We came together to build an irrevocable database of financial transactions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a fair amount of contention within the Bitcoin community about whether or not like op return should even be like allowed as its own like standalone output from a transaction.
And
Um,
wasn't Vitalik one of the authors of the white paper
oh, I don't
uh
know.
for colored coins?
For colored
Uh
coins.
yeah,
uh,
I'm pretty sure.
So you can see
Um
how, I mean, you can see how with like a transaction, like I could send a little bit of Bitcoin along with another transaction in like one output of a transaction, and then another output of that same transaction. I could have like, this color is red, op return, right? Or like this
mm.
color is green, op return.
And so what happened actually? Like these colored coins, this contention in the community, did they got kind of just stop as a social consensus, or was there some kind of software upgrade to kind of stop this kind of behavior, or what ended up happening?
I mean, first off, a lot of wallet software providers stopped offering the capacity to attach op return to a transaction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like obviously you could do it programmatically and just like broadcast your transaction to the network. But if you're using like a front end like UI for like a wallet, then you would no longer have access to like writing that data. Also, it got reduced from I think it was like 80 bytes to like 40 bytes for the people that were trying to use this. And then overall, like this sort of approach is a little bit like inelegant because if you're going to start worrying about op return, you have to worry about all of the op return, right? You can't just worry about like one address or like the piece of data that you care about, right? Um, you have to worry about like all of this additional data.
And then you're
And
censoring transactions basically at that point. At that point, if you only let certain op returns go through and certain not certain, then you're like censoring transactions basically, right?
well, I mean, you could have censorship at like the minor level, but the bigger issue, because like it's always in miners' best interest to include any transaction that'll pay them, right? Um, but the bigger issue is if you're trying to build like on top of this, like say you and I were trying to build Blue Coin as like a kind of Bitcoin that like represented something else, right? Maybe represents a pudgy penguin. Like, and we have like 10,000 UTXOs, and each of them has the like or we call it penguin coin, right? Each of them has like the marker that like this is a penguin coin now. Um, if we wanted to like build anything on top of that, we would need to use like a full archival node that listened to all of the transactions op returns, and because any of them could have like that data, right? And if you're gonna have nodes that are like pruning op returns, then you know you need to be really careful about like listening to the network for every single transaction. It winds up becoming like not very friendly for a like client, right? And therefore not super friendly for anyone to like build anything on top of it. So it was kind of a hack, right? It was like we could add a little color or some other piece of metadata to a Bitcoin like UTXO that would like have some kind of impact on what it represents in the real world. But then you also need to worry about all of the other metadata that's getting added to every other Bitcoin transaction ever.
Yeah.
Right. And so it winds up being like not very scalable, hard to track. And that like difficulty in user experience of like needing to track like individual blocks in order to ensure that like you don't miss something that could impact like the state of the world for your colored coin, because it is just like Bitcoins getting sent with like a little extra metadata. That like lack of developer friendliness, I think, sort of led to these things not becoming widely popularized as a way to represent assets on chain.
Okay, so what next, right? Like we kind of see that on Bitcoin, this initially, like there was just pushback, right, to scaling the network to other sorts of activity outside of financial activity. Now, you know, you could say there's almost like a pushback to scaling the network, right? Like if you look at the history of Bitcoin, there actually is definitely a pushback to scaling the network, at least on the base layer, right? You've seen that with the block wars, as they're called now. You've seen that with a lot of upgrades just taking years and years and years to go through because of an abundance of caution. So that, I guess, gets us into our next point. Like, what does that lead us into? Does we get straight into Taproot from there, like what Taproot actually is and does?
Yeah, I think we'll touch on that in a second, but one other aspect of Bitcoin that I find really interesting when it comes to like not just scaling, but like changing any part of the protocol overall is the way that consensus is achieved, right? Like you can have user activated soft forks, user denied soft forks is a term that I learned today. You can have like miners flagging their support for something using like an extra bit in the block. Like you can have Bitcoin developers, and like you can have someone submit a pull request to like the Bitcoin Core like repository on GitHub, and just nobody ever responds to it, and so that dev doesn't know like if there is any support for it or not, right? It's just a large decentralized like mess of a world, right? Because you have like so many different like stakeholders in Bitcoin. You have the miners, right? You have the users, you have exchanges, right? The developers themselves, and so even just from like a social coordination perspective, Bitcoin itself doesn't give you that same like smaller developer community effect that you get from something like Ethereum, right? Where like if you maybe just by nature of the Ethereum Foundation existing, even who to go to talk to try to get things like suggested as part of the like community driven like hard fork meetings. Like there are monthly or bi-weekly sometimes like core dev meetings where like permissionlessly people can attend, right? And so Ethereum is just like much more organized when it comes to upgrading the software or just like rolling out any kind of changes, really.
Yeah. I mean, it is a more centralized network in that way, right? Like they have a foundation, they have a founder that's in the public. So I think it's a really interesting thing looking back at different kinds of software upgrades and how they actually went through. Like what is the book called? The Block Size Wars. We talked about it last time too, but it's super interesting. The reason I thought it was a super interesting book is that it really goes through like how this stuff gets adopted by the community. And in the end, like once the community adopts it, it's hard to stop that from actually taking place in some way, right? Like, I don't know, like you say this a lot, but in Bitcoin, I think it really is true that it does come down to a social consensus. And the way that's implemented is very different in different circumstances. And you see that over time, right?
What
Yeah.
do you mean? Like, do you have an example of like?
Well, just like, like certain things like the user activated soft fork, right? When there was like a debate over the block size limit, this pseudonymous guy literally just posted his proposal on Twitter about a user activated soft fork, right? There were basically only two other proposals. And then this guy was like, no, we can do this other thing, this like user activated soft fork. And it basically completely took fire within the community. Like people started making hats, like UASF hats, like all this crazy stuff. And it really just picked up like kind of like a grassroots movement at the last hour too, like a month or two before they're set to hard fork. And so stuff like that can happen within Bitcoin. And at the same time, you can also see like a lot of other changes to the software, right, that are, like backwards compatible as well, where like only maybe 30%, like initially when Taproot went into effect, like only like 20 or 30%, of all the nodes, I think, had upgraded, like even like 6 months, 9 months later. But it was still, being used by some. So like, I don't know, it's just like, in the same way that you said, it's such a messy system, but things can happen in a very much uncoordinated way when people really want them to happen.
It's pretty interesting, right? I mean, over the years, you've seen so many people try to be like that sort of almost Ethereum foundation of Bitcoin, right? Like you've got like Blockstream and like I'm not as deep in the Bitcoin community as some people are, but like there are people that have tried over the years to be those like central players that like at least like influence public opinion or like social consensus
It's
more
definitely
strongly than
Blockstream.
others. Is it
It's
Blockstream?
definitely
Is that
Blockstream. Yeah,
huh?
they basically won the block size wars, right? The way people say it is like their whole thing was to keep the blocks small, and they make a bunch of products that are built to support, like basically, like
Small
they're like
blocks.
secondary. Yeah, basically, yeah.
This is the old
So
school FTX like SBF going into Congress and being like, "Hey guys, this decentralized finance thing, don't love that." These guys are like, "Yo. Do you guys realize what big blocks could mean for this community? Your constituents think." Here, like, yeah, they're arguably less effective, right? Like, yeah, what if Blockstream had taken the SPF approach and like gone into Congress to outlaw big blocks, like, like creating
that
like
would be pretty funny,
the
actually.
DCCPA but for big blocks.
That would be terrible. That's basically what people accuse them of within the Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Unlimited communities. They're like, yeah, guys, you guys don't want to be shills for Blockstream. You guys let Blockstream take over all of Bitcoin. Now it's just a big circle jerk with all the insiders. So I don't know. You can use many ways to look at the same thing. So
All right, fuck it. We're going down this rabbit hole. Wasn't there something with one of the miners where like one of the miners stood to like lose if like blocks got bigger? They had like created some ASIC that was like only capable of like executing things correctly if like the blocks were small.
um,
Do you
I
know
mean, I
anything?
would
Do you remember anything about
maybe.
this?
I know, I know when Bitcoin Cash came out, Bitmain's founder Jihan Wu was one of the biggest supporters of it and lost just exorbitant amounts of money, trying to pump Bitcoin Cash. So for like a year, Bitcoin Cash, or like initially it pumped a ton, and then like it was also pumping for like, I don't know, it was like staying afloat for a while, and then just completely nuked after he ran out of money. But yeah, him and Roger Ver were like the big two supporters of it. And I think that's how they initially got miners to move over to the network. But in terms of the big miner that stood to lose a lot from the big blocks, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not totally sure.
Maybe that's what I
thing.
was thinking. Is I thought there was some allegation about Bitmain having some like financial interest in the outcome of the block size wars, and maybe that was it. Maybe they had maybe they had miners with like larger RAM than their competitors or something. They were able for whatever reason, they had some kind of hardware acceleration that worked just as well on big blocks as little, and so and I want to say, if I remember correctly from that book, we should just do a live reading of this book.
That
we'll do that
pretty
for
nice.
the next Bitcoin month. Yeah.
You know, that guy actually I would love to have as a guest. He works at Kraken. I can easily get him on.
You're kidding, really?
Yeah, he works at Kraken.
All right. Well, can we have a listener activated guest episode?
Listener activated guest. Yes. I don't know if Pete listens, but if Pete listens, I'll hit you up, bro. I think Pete was tight with him. Wait, no, Hassan still works there. I'll hit him up.
Yeah, I can hit up Jesse.
Cool.
No, I can't.
You can only hit him up for talking about very specific things, dude. Okay.
Well, we're gonna get into his favorite subject pretty soon, which is
proof of reserves?
Merkle trees. Yeah.
Oh, Merkle trees. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just before we wrap that up, like the weirdest thing to me is like if you look at even just like a core update that like everybody was on board with, like SegWit, right, where it was just clearly a good thing for the network that made it more efficient, right? It was the same like Congress like thing where they were trying to like bundle it into like big blocks only, right, or something. It was like the big block bill also included like a little SegWit writer, or the SegWit bill included a big block writer. So I mean, the messiness there is not unlike traditional politics actually. Whereas the Ethereum Foundation, it's much more like a central party governing benevolently.
That's true.
Or dude, at least everyone knows where to go.
Right. Dude, I'm looking at it even now. Like SegWit adoption is still in the 80% range.
You're kidding.
So, yeah, no.
What?
You can check it on Wooble. But it's pretty interesting.
Interesting. So okay, so let's move on to, you know, because we do get some progress in the Bitcoin community. We do get some innovation and added complexity of the protocol. It takes time, but we do get a bit. And the most recent hard fork was Taproot.
And so okay, real quick for the listeners here, can you explain what the difference is between a hard fork and a soft fork? Because I think Taproot is a soft fork, right? I'm looking at Taproot.
I think I got it wrong. Yeah, I think it was a soft fork. Yeah, I think with ETH they tend to execute like a lot of their upgrades as hard forks.
Yeah, Bitcoin really goes away from that.
Yeah, like, I think part of it is like backwards compatibility, right? But it's also just not something Bitcoin would stand for, right? Any kind of network upgrade that forks the network into one state versus another. Like we had so much of that back in the day. People don't want the fork wars. So yeah, I think it is a soft fork. Basically what Taproot does, it does a few things. One thing that it does is it enhances the efficiency of signatures by using something called Schnorr signatures. Love that word. And these are like it's amazing. Like you go to read articles about Taproot and they're like, let's go through the full history of Schnorr signatures and everyone that's ever like proposed like adding, you know, so it's like we can go back to the Bitcoin Talk forum back in 2014 and like trace back to like, I mean, you'll have something like a Schnorr signature that has like just universal like approval from everyone in the community. Nobody's like opposed to Schnorr signatures. They're like just better in every way from EDCSA, right?
Yeah.
And like the only people that actually care about this already know that. Like they've known that for 6 years, right? And yet it still doesn't get into the Bitcoin protocol for like almost a decade after it's proposed. So that's one thing that Taproot did, but it did this other really interesting thing, right? Which was to introduce the concept of a Taproot script. Do you know anything about this?
No, no.
Taproot scripts are fascinating.
Mm.
So you have it's like a tree structure, effectively called it tap script branch, right?
Mm.
And you have you can picture like abstract logic as something called like an abstract syntax tree, but just imagine you have like a script, right, that runs some kind of logic. It can have multiple paths of logic that like fork out into like different branches based on, binary like variables, right? So I could have a script that says, you know, we call it communism script, right? Where it's like 10 people vote to participate in communism.
Okay.
Communism script holds all of their Bitcoin. Later, you look at their balances and you distribute the Bitcoin that it has. Like more, you send more of it to the people that have less Bitcoin in their addresses.
Okay.
It can do
Okay.
stuff like that,
Yeah, I
right?
see.
Or you could have like more complex versions of multisigs where it could be like, look, like I have the real signature, but if I'm dead, maybe we let 3 out of 5 of my friends control the Bitcoin,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So like I don't need any kind of like additional signatures to control the Bitcoin in this address, but like short of that, you could have like 3 out of 5 of these multi-sig people also send the Bitcoins out of this address, right?
Okay, right. So these are the kinds of things that I had seen. It's like different kinds of multi-sigs, different kinds of basically addresses, right? So like on a fundamental level, how does that work exactly? You basically have it's basically like a very simple OR kind of thing where it's like either this one wallet or like either you get a signature from this one private key or you get a signature from 3 out of these 5. It's just something like that.
Yeah, like most logic, it comes down to like and, not, and, or, and
Yeah, yeah.
XOR, right? But effectively the idea is, Bitcoin does have scripting, and we have just enough scripting now to do more interesting things like this, right? We still don't have like full like arbitrary like programmability the way we have it in Ethereum, but there is some scripting. What's really cool about Taproot is, and we've had scripting before, right? It's what enabled things like multi-sigs, right? What's cool about Taproot is it allows you actually to post like a sort of like shielded version of the script, and then you can have 2 things here, right? So you can have something like called a key spend path. This is a little bit like the scenario where like I have the real key, and but if I don't like, and so if I sign a transaction, I can just get the Bitcoin out. Don't worry about the script, right? That's the key script, right? But you can also have the like sort of shielded logic, and if say like say I have some weird complex thing where like I'll let you and one of my friends sign a 2 out of 5 multi-sig, but that's because you're on my podcast and I love you, but I might have friends that I love a little bit less, right? Our listeners, for example. All 4 of them might also be part of this multi-sig, and I might require 3 out of 5 of them. Well, whichever one of these gets used, like whichever logical path actually gets executed, that's the only part that actually gets revealed, which is pretty interesting, right? So you have this like much more private version of scripting that's enabled by Taproot.
Okay.
And this kind of programmability allows you to like put a lot more complex logic in without submitting as much data, right?
And so how does something like Taproot really come about, right? Like how do they come up with something new like this that within the confines of the original Bitcoin protocol is able to do these kinds of things? Are they taking anything off chain? Or is it just a different way for the same kind of fundamental structures like base, like units, like the wallets that have already been kind of created? Like, are they just building on the same primitives in a different way that nobody's tapped into yet? Or what exactly is this upgrade? Like, how is it exactly enabled?
So as you create like, as you create like new functionality on Bitcoin, every piece of like new possibility is introducing something called a BIP,
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin Improvement Proposal. Some of them do require like adding code to Bitcoin Core. Many of them do. Some of them don't, and they're just like, you know, like EIP like 20, right? Or like ERC 20, right? That's just like a standard. You can have BRCs, but you can also have BIPs that like don't touch the code. And they're just sort of like created by the community, right? In the case of Taproot, it does require like a fair amount of code to be added to the Bitcoin protocol itself to allow you to do things like when, like, you know, when I sign a transaction that touches one of these like private scripts, I will, you know, like say the 2 out of 5 multi-sig path is getting like activated. So you and another friend are like signing a transaction to like spend the Bitcoin out of my address. You have to post the code that makes up that branch of logic, right? And so you can imagine it a little bit like there's a hash of the branch sitting there, right? We don't know exactly what data hashes to that hash. And then you and whoever know that part of the script, and you have your private keys. And so you'd submit the signed script to the blockchain. And then the miners can verify, okay, yeah, this script matches the hash that I see with the initial transaction. And so it's almost a little bit like ZK, right? Where you have some kind of logic getting done that's not necessarily like revealed in full, but can still be proven to be valid. It's just with the added caveat of like the part of it that you're using is revealed, right? Like, you know, so the piece of code where it's like if Karan plus friend submit transaction, or, you know, submit private key or submit signed transaction, then send the Bitcoin, right? Like you might have to include that like source code effectively. And then any miner can look at that, hash it, and be like, oh, okay, yeah, that matches like this piece of the Taproot script. So it allows it to be like way, way, way more efficient, right? Without posting like a huge amount of data on chain. And then you and all my friends and whoever I want to like know how this thing works, you can have the source code off chain and like share it as needed when it's time to actually like call these transactions. Or you could share nothing if like I have this like master key that allows me to send the Bitcoin. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
So that's really Taproot's big thing, and it's really cool, right? Like the ability to have, like, they call it pruned like script data, where you don't send the whole script. You definitely don't send the whole script on chain because that would be wasteful if you're only going to execute like one of the outcomes, right? At the most, you should just submit the minimum that you need, which is like the script, the part of the script, like the logical path that it actually follows.
And so all of that all that stuff that you mentioned that is like stored off chain, like where is that done? Like where is that stored? Like
you would have
like
to hold on
within
to
the
a
wallet?
copy of it.
Yeah. Okay, I see.
You know, this is a relatively recent like soft fork of Bitcoin, so it's not, you know, it's not something that gets used all the time. And you know, I'd imagine that like the people that are actually making use of this feature, either your wallet holds it in a cloud storage somewhere, or like you're just a developer and you just hold on to that code, right?
Or I would imagine you're using it through some kind of service that is managing all of that for you, right? Like either, I don't know what exchange offers it, but like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it'd probably be Kraken Bitcoin Exchange, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's yeah, you'd have some kind of service managing it for you or something.
Yeah.
So you know, I mean, you could imagine actually like some kind of dead man switch, right? Where like you know, if I die, I want my Bitcoin to be accessible by a certain number of like addresses, but I don't tell them who they are until I die. And so I have to post, you know, maybe I have to post something in the Bitcoin blockchain every day. And if I don't for 10 days straight, then another transaction gets revealed or something that has like the full script. I don't know. There's all sorts of interesting things that you can do here. But generally the philosophy is to keep as much logic off chain as possible, both from a like privacy perspective and just to be considerate to like everyone that's running like a full archival node.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So that's generally a summary of what Taproot is, how it works, right? Um, let's get into Taro. First of all, what is the relationship between Taproot and Taro? Um, Taproot is the first part of the Taro acronym. So, kind of, what is the relationship there? And then, like, what, just generally speaking, what exactly is Taro?
Yeah, so Taproot enables features such as these like Taproot scripts that are necessary for Taro to exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Taro itself is meant to be like a protocol for issuing like non-Bitcoin assets on the Bitcoin blockchain. So you can imagine this being like a stable coin, right? Or whatever token you want to invent, like could be created on chain on Bitcoin. Is the idea.
Okay.
It works with Bitcoin and it's meant to work with Lightning. So
Yeah.
this is why initially, like one of our listeners wrote in was like, yo, you guys, like at the end of our last Bitcoin deep dive on the Lightning network, we'll link it in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of that, we kind of came to this conclusion that Lightning was extremely cool, right? Peer to peer, had a lot of promise, but hadn't really picked up. And one of the reasons for that, I think the primary reason for that is that people don't want to spend their Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
It's like pretty plain and simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to spend my fiat. It's devaluing, right? I think Bitcoin will go up over time, so I don't want to spend it, right? And natively, Bitcoin is the only asset on the Bitcoin blockchain. And so, it means that like all of this incredibly cool tech, like the Lightning Network, can't really be used in a way that like most people would demand to use it.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us to Taro, which is a way to issue non-Bitcoin assets or like representations of those assets on the Bitcoin blockchain. Very, very cool.
Okay, let's get into it. How does that even happen?
How does this exist?
How does this exist? This
Um,
one, we don't really even need to get into why this exists. Like, if this is a possibility, it enables quite a bit, I think. But
yeah,
how does this
it's not
exist?
just that it enables like quite a bit, but it also represents like a potential on-ramp for a lot of people to Bitcoin, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a way that like a lot of people have entered Ethereum, not because of ETH, but because of NFTs
Mm-hmm.
or because of stablecoin payments. A lot of people probably have Phantom wallets for primarily USDC,
Mm-hmm.
and the Solana in your wallet is like an afterthought, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin doesn't have that yet. Bitcoin is just Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And so this could be like, not just like better than some of these other networks because it builds off of like a lot of decentralization and strong security, but also better just because it creates like a use case for everyone out here to actually use the Bitcoin blockchain Lightning Network. How does this exist? Great question. So effectively, the way that it works, right, is if you have an asset, you have to like issue it, and then you have to like send it to people.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with like issuing or like minting a new asset, right? So within the Taro protocol, each asset has like an asset ID, which is basically like that, the hash of the transaction that creates it, right? It's this like Genesis ID, they call it.
Okay.
So, and then, so it's got your like Genesis out point, is the name of that, the asset tag and the asset metadata.
Okay.
And so the tag might be USDC and the metadata might be like circle.com/USDC or something,
Okay.
right? Then you have your transaction that actually creates the asset, right? Each asset is represented by a Merkle tree. So this is where like Jesse Powell would get kind of into this. And it creates some kind of interesting properties that I think like make it pretty compelling. So the Merkle tree, right? It's a special kind of Merkle tree called a Merkle sum tree,
Okay.
where you can where effectively you get like so a Merkle tree to review, and definitely check out our proof of reserves episode if you're like still new to this.
Yeah.
But effectively, a Merkle tree will allow you to check that your holdings are included in a tree of assets, in like a list of assets, right? And it does that efficiently through like hashing, and you can basically check that like the hash of your like wallet balance is included in the overall Merkle tree that sums to a certain amount, right? And so when like, let's say like you and I go to Circle and we're like, hey, please issue USDC on Bitcoin, right? And you give them $10 and I give them $5, right? Circle will like sign this transaction that takes the root of the Merkle tree and posts it to the chain as part of like a Taproot script, right? And then they can give us the like source code effectively for that Taproot script that we can verify against it.
Okay,
so
I see.
They can give us the info like, you have $10, I have $5, right? And they'll say, here, your public address is this, your balance is that, hash it and check the Merkle tree to see if it's in there. Then you can also check the sum of all of the leaves of this tree and make sure that we only printed 15 USDC because you have 10 and I have 5.
Right. Okay. So it's a way for every person that interacts with. Is this considered a contract? Or
it's just kind of a tree of balances, right? So this tree itself wouldn't get posted on chain, right? Just the root of it would get posted on chain.
Okay, and but then, it's a way, like fundamentally, it's a way for every person that interacts, I guess, with the Merkle tree to independently verify that they have made it into the list of transactions.
To verify that their public key is associated with whatever balance. Right.
Okay, so it's a balance that you're checking for, not an actual transaction.
No, it's a balance within that Merkle tree.
Okay.
And they use something called a sparse Merkle tree, which is like not necessary to get into. But this is basically a tree that like links addresses to balances. And so you can do a couple of interesting things with this setup, right? The first one is if I want to prove to someone that I have 5 Bitcoin USDC, given my address, and they have like the Merkle tree with all the hashes, they can hash my address and my balance of 5 and check for that within the leaves of the tree, right? So they can verify that like that like Circle has only minted in fact 15 USDC, and B that my address has 5 of those, right? Anybody that has access to like that data can do that.
Okay.
Then let's say like I want to send my USDC to someone else, like I want to tip someone one USDC, right? I have to create a new tree, right? So this is where like the off-chain stuff happens, is like we all have this data of like what the tree is, right? Of like all of the different hashes. What I need to do is generate a new tree that adds a leaf for the person that I want to tip, right? And deletes the leaf for me. And then it's like a UTXO, right? So my unspent 4 will go to a different public key, and then my spent 1 will go to someone else, and then my old one needs to be updated to 0, needs to be removed from the tree.
Okay, right? I see.
And I need to be able to prove that too.
Okay. And this happens anytime you're initiating a new transaction with a new wallet?
Yeah, exactly. The tree needs to be updated, and given my signature for that like address that holds 5 Bitcoin USDC, the Taproot contract will allow me to post a new valid Merkle root that has that, right? And so it's effectively like updating the state of the balances of everyone, right? That's kind of the idea.
Okay.
And it just uses Merkle trees and some fancy math to make sure that it's getting done correctly.
Okay. And this,
that's
yeah, no, go ahead.
That's kind of the idea for like how it lives on chain on Bitcoin. It's a
Mm,
little bit like a list of addresses that people are able to check without having to post all of the data directly on chain, which would be prohibitively expensive, and difficult to verify and all of that, right?
mm-hmm.
Here we just have this one like UTXO that like we need to track, and then it can get like its Merkle tree like updated by people that hold the tokens.
And so,
Um,
yeah, and so at a very basic level, like just on the token creation level, right? How is this different than how tokens are either created or transferred on Ethereum or any other kind of, layer one blockchain, similar to that?
So in a layer one blockchain, like when an ERC20 is created on Ethereum, for example, it's pretty much the same idea, right? That like you create the token and mint whatever supply, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the full the full data involved on Ethereum, it's stored directly on chain,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas on Bitcoin, it's just enough data stored on chain to verify how many were minted. And then if
Mm,
you're someone that got minted to, you can also verify that like your balance is included as well.
okay. I see. And so, like, once again, right, that off-chain storage, where exactly does that happen? Do you have to be running a like Taproot specific node or something like that to verify all the transactions coming through? Do they get verified locally? Like, do you have to be doing that on your end? Like, all that off-chain work, like, where exactly does that happen?
So when the balances get updated, the like you can think of it like a ledger, like its own little ledger actually.
Mm-hmm.
And we just kind of have like a hash of the ledger sitting on chain so that
Mm-hmm.
people can verify A, that they have like the correct copy of it, and B, that like their balance is present in that copy,
Mm,
right? And so when you want to update the ledger, you do have to send a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain, right?
mm.
Now this like Taproot script is smart enough to check that like the update that gets sent is like valid, right? Um, and then after that happens, you need to tell everyone else in the network about it. Um, so uh, it's not super scalable out of the box, right? Like it does sort of, the thing is it kind of has to adhere to Bitcoin's like, let's put a little bit less data on the chain approach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then from there, it can reach scalability through the Lightning Network,
Mm.
right? So Ethereum just has a lot more data being sent, right? And you pay for that, right? Like for an Ethereum transaction, you pay generally more than you do for a Bitcoin transaction, depending on the day,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you need to interact with any of these contracts, storing data on chain is actually quite expensive.
Mm.
Whereas with Bitcoin, like it's just kind of agreed upon that there's a maximum amount of data we can put on this chain and nobody abuses it.
Mm.
Part of the reason nobody abuses it is because you can't have like full contracts on there,
Yeah.
but you can
There's
have things like verifying Merkle trees,
mm.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
if you play by the rules, you can do the logic that you need to on Bitcoin, but you can't just have like the full trees sitting there on chain.
Okay, that makes
Um,
sense. This
so it would
is
be like its own peer-to-peer network where like
yeah.
I'm telling you, here's what's going on. Circle has a copy of it. Everyone else has a copy of it. And it's fully verifiable that like only valid things changed, right? And it's reflected on chain as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's not sitting on the Bitcoin blockchain.
Okay, and so you're basically running like what would that be called? You're running a Taproot node or something like that?
Well, I guess the Taproot node would check the state of the chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it would be more like Taproot does other shit too, right? It's
Mm.
not This is not like the only application of Taproot scripts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this would be like a Taro node, or
Mm.
like what's more likely is each asset issuer would have their own peer-to-peer gossip protocol that people are using to relay back and forth like what the state of USDC on Bitcoin is.
Okay, that makes sense.
So you have like one USDC peer-to-peer gossip network. You have one for like DAI or whatever, one for USDT, one for any other asset that you want to make. Um,
Mm.
so in reality, like Circle is going to be the ones like keeping track of most of this, and most people are just going to trust them. But there will be some peer-to-peer nature of it as well.
And his Circle already announced plans to launch using Taro?
No.
Okay.
It's still pretty experimental, right? I would expect to see Tether go first, right?
That makes more sense, yeah.
If not, like, we should just do it, because where it gets really powerful is on the Lightning Network.
Okay, so Taro on Lightning. What exactly is going on there?
So, like, the Lightning Network, like, just quick recap, right, involves creating payment channels, right? So you and I might create like a bidirectional payment channel, right?
Yep.
And
check out our deep dive if you don't know what that means.
Yeah, check out the Lightning Network deep dive. Historically, what we've done is we've created a bidirectional payment channel with Bitcoin, but with Taro, we could actually create one that primarily settles in USDC, for example. So you put in your 10 USDC, I put in my 5. We sign an exit transaction that sends our assets back to us, right? And the whole thing looks just like Lightning Network, where now we're sending each other USDC instead of sending each other Bitcoin.
That's cool.
Where it gets really compelling and like fascinating is you can have like a little bit more complex logic, right? Where today you say, I'm willing to send my Bitcoin to anyone that I have a channel open with in exchange for like 1 basis point per day or whatever of like additional Bitcoin, right? What I might say is, I'm willing to send USDC to anyone and accept Bitcoin at the price of $17,000 of Bitcoin. And someone else might say, I'm willing to accept Bitcoin and send euros at the price of 17,000 or 18,000 euros per Bitcoin. And someone else might say, I'm willing to send Bitcoin and accept dollars or whatever, right? So you can have composable, or I'm willing to send a pudgy penguin in exchange for this much Bitcoin, right? And someone else might say, I'm willing to send a pudgy penguin in exchange for this much, or I'll buy one for this much Bitcoin. So
okay.
If you...
Yeah, hold on. Finish up the thought.
Well, think about the network now, right?
Yeah.
Today, primarily, like the liquidity that's available on the Lightning Network. Yeah, before I go into even more examples. So the liquidity that's available today is primarily available in Bitcoin, right? And it'll probably remain that.
It's constrained,
I guess it's
because if like Circle has an issue, then like what other?
Yeah, I mean, Taro itself went live, I think, back in September on Bitcoin, just like layer 1, right? And I think they were planning to do a couple of months of testing and stuff before they like enable Lightning. But I actually think on testnet you're able to use Taro on Lightning today, which is pretty interesting. So if you think about the liquidity here, right? Maybe like you and I have a channel open and you and your other friend have a channel open, but I don't have a channel with them. And I'm hanging out with your friend and we're in Europe, so I want to send them some euros. But like, I don't have any euros. You might be willing to quote me a euro to Bitcoin, exchange rate. But like, let's say maybe it's your friend's friend that I'm hanging out with now. That like transfer, so we're going me to you, to your friend, to their friend. I have dollars. I send you some dollars. You send some Bitcoin to your friend. Your friend sends some euros to their friend. And so you really only need the like Bitcoin on and off ramp. If you think about it that way, you only need that Bitcoin denominated liquidity at the like start and finish of the like transaction network. It could be in the last one or it could be the second to last one, right? Generally it's they've been in documentation, it's the second to last one. So your friend does the exchange of, so I send you Bitcoin or dollars or whatever. You send Bitcoin to the next person, and then if they're the last person in line, they do the conversion there and send it to the last person.
Okay. So okay, with some of these like these traditional currencies, I get it. You have an issuer, they have these kind of synthetic assets on chain or on Bitcoin blockchain. what about something like a pudgy penguin, which you know mentioned? It's like, how can you have a pudgy penguin on the Bitcoin blockchain using Taro? Like, are you referring to the actual like ERC20 asset, or just like something else, like a new
Something
kind
else,
of, yeah,
just
yeah, just like a,
conceptually,
yeah, okay, okay,
conceptually NFTs,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
okay, 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 cool.
Yeah,
So that's the
and this
power of
actually
this
makes it
thing, yeah,
possible to create like
exactly.
non-fungible tokens,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah,
Because I'm sure it's the same thing. You can assign some kind of metadata attached to each new token that you're creating.
yeah. So instead of
Very
HTTPS
interesting.
colon slash slash like circle.com slash icon.png, now you can go to
Mm,
IPFS if you wanted to and have the image of each pudgy penguin sitting in the metadata
mm,
of the Taro contract, or not
mm.
contract, but the Taro like transaction.
Yeah, I see. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, if there's NFTs on Bitcoin, maybe people will start moving back to Bitcoin. That would be hilarious. Can you imagine? Oh my lord. That would be incredible.
The Bitcoiners would be so pissed.
God. Yeah. They would all just have fun staying poor, you know? As they say, like everybody's getting rich on Bitcoin NFTs, and like the Bitcoin price is flat at 17K for the next 10 years.
I mean, it is a good question, right? Like, is this bullish for Bitcoin?
I mean, as with everything, it depends on the adoption, right? Like I've learned to understand that the tech actually doesn't matter. Um, so
Say it gets
like
adopted.
then yeah, super bullish. Yeah, this is like, I mean, you're bringing a lot of the coolest parts of Ethereum over to Bitcoin, right? Um, so
Yeah,
yeah, I think that
but I mean, do you think like is that in terms of just like demand for gas or for payments or what? Because like the Lightning Network's obviously like way cheaper to settle on
yeah.
even than like ETH, right? It's effectively like a Bitcoin layer two, but like peer to peer.
For sure, yeah. I think that something like like the stable coin example that you mentioned, Taro on Lightning. Like, if you use Lightning Network, it's actually a really great experience. Like using something like Breeze Wallet, it's nice. So, like, I think that there is a really strong use case where if Bitcoin is kind of or like Sats, right, on the Lightning Network are the settlement layer, or like sorry, not the settlement layer. Bitcoin is the settlement layer. Sats are the gas token, and you can have any asset being exchanged all around. Pretty similar to what we mentioned on the Lightning Network, right? You can have basically a massive amount of Bitcoin being staked. You have these like currency markets almost, right, across payment channels across the world. But it really depends on the adoption and like what kind of stuff people build. You could have said that there's a way in which Ethereum could have also gone sideways if people weren't actually building stuff on top of it. Now we have like some useful applications, some stuff that people like, right? There's not,
Tornado Cash.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Tornado Cash and USDC, right? People have two applications now. So, yeah, I don't know. It really depends. Like, I think people will be incentivized, or I don't know if they will be incentivized. They might be incentivized to try new things, create new things, mint new types of assets. Um, if the tech is cool enough and it actually provides value, then people will build cool things, which will bring more people, which is adoption, and then that's bullish for Bitcoin.
I guess I'm wondering more from like a fundamental perspective, right? Of like if 99% of the transactions happening on Bitcoin are actually happening on Lightning, where
Mm-hmm.
like you don't have to pay miners to like secure immediately at least.
Mm-hmm.
And if 99% of those transactions are happening in USDC, in Bitcoin USDC or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
how much does Bitcoin actually get used here, right?
Well, it doesn't get used. I mean, that's kind of the whole point, right?
Or how much Bitcoin are people going to have to buy?
Well, they won't have to buy any. They won't have to buy any for the network to be just functioning, right? Like, people don't buy Bitcoin because they think they're going to use it, even now.
You have to buy a bit, right, to pay your gas for opening your channel on the Lightning Network, right?
Oh, but
So there's
nobody's
definitely
doing
like
that.
a bit of incremental demand.
I know. But
Well, if you
nobody's-
want to, if you want to use Taro on Lightning,
Yeah.
you need a channel.
No, I
of
know.
some
No.
kind,
I'm
right?
just saying right now, the current state is
Yeah,
that
right now nobody's doing that.
nobody's using Bitcoin. No, but like just as like broadly, right? The buyer set, right, is not using it for its utility, or is not buying it for its utility. It's buying it for its kind of, I guess, use as a store of value, not use as a gas token, right? So I don't think this changes that very much.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess from a fundamentals perspective, it's hard to see like a huge amount of incremental demand from Bitcoin, even if this takes off successfully.
Not for Bitcoin itself, but I do think that the same way that people are using ETH and they just kind of get introduced to the concept of ETH and they're like, oh, well, you know what? Instead of just like cashing out into USDC, I'm just going to like hold ETH now. It's kind of the same effect, right?
Yeah. That would be really cool.
Yeah. I think it'd be interesting if that happened.
NFTs priced in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Trying to just like stack sats by flipping Bitcoin-based shitcoins.
Yeah. Flip penguins, get ETH, flip more penguins on ETH to get more Bitcoin-based penguins, flip those to get more Bitcoin.
A beautiful world.
Satoshi's true vision. I think that's a good place to wrap. You got anything else on Taro or Taproot?
No, I think it's really cool and it's exciting stuff, and I hope it gets widely adopted. And if it doesn't, I think we should do it.
Yeah, the stablecoin idea sounds fantastic. I'm into that. Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. Why
Get
not?
acquired by Circle. Yeah.
All right. We'll leave you with that bit of alpha, listeners. All right. This has been the deep dive on Taro. We will be back in a few days with a recap of everything that happened this week. Have a good week, everybody. Stay safe. Till then, stay decent.
None of this was financial advice, legal advice, investment advice, or any other kind of advice. If you're looking for advice, you are definitely in the wrong place. Until next time, stay decent.